Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Steve. This is my wife, Lindsay.
Hi.
And today we're going to be reacting to the Great Kilt. Now, this is a topic we've been wanting to explore for quite some time now. I do remember doing a very short video about kilts in general, probably about 6 months or so ago. And it really didn't go into too much detail about the purpose of the kilt, but this video was recommended to me by a subscriber, and so this is something Lindsay and I have been talking about checking out for quite some time now, and so I've had this video bookmarked and thought this would be a good time for us to go ahead and explore this. So don't really know what to expect here. Do you know anything about kilts at all?
They have different tartans. Is that what you call it? Like the different color schemes on the plaid?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I know that, but I don't know which is which.
Right. So this should be interesting because I know a little bit more about them than you do, but I definitely really haven't seen them in action. When I did a reaction to this topic, it was a very short video, and it came from the perspective of an American or a couple Americans that were basically in touch with their, I think, Irish roots. And it was at that point that I actually learned that Irishmen actually do wear kilts as well.
I know. I feel like in America, a lot of people think it's just Scottish.
Right.
It's just a Scottish thing.
Yeah, but I think maybe more Scottish people, I think it might be more popular in Scotland than it is Ireland, because I've never actually seen, when I've seen videos with Irish men or stuff like, I've never seen them wear kilts, but I've seen, a lot of videos where Scottish men are wearing kilts.
The only reason I know that Irishmen wear them too is because I had a supervisor a long time ago when I worked at the library. He was Irish and he would always wear a kilt.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Not a very common thing in the U.S. But.
No, not at all. Not at all. But anyways, guys, enough rambling from us. Let's go ahead and dive in here and check out the Great Kilt.
Are you still breathing? If so, and hopefully you still are, then congratulations, you have fulfilled the first priority of survival. Your next priority is maintaining your core body temperature, and your clothing is your first line of defense for this. So what's the simplest, most useful item of clothing you can think of? Well, for me, it'd probably be some sort of big blanket. And my favorite big blanket is known as the Great Kilt, or the belted plaid.
I'm curious, is there a difference between what you see Scottish men normally wearing when they're wearing kilts versus the Great Kilt?
Yeah, must be.
Is it like a half kilt and a full, like a Great Kilt? I don't know.
One thing I really don't like, at least in the U.S., is how hard it is to source clothing and materials that are like 100% wool or 100% linen.
Everything's polyester.
Yes, it's all like these polyester blends.
Fake
Even
fabrics.
the wool is a blend usually.
Yeah, it's true.
So, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, he said, can you see him now? I can't. I have no idea where he's at. Wait, is that him right there?
I was thinking here, but I don't know.
I don't know.
Here? So, stay tuned. Why am I talking about the Great Kilt? Well, for me, it's the jack of all trades when it comes to clothing and simple shelter. And much like a good knife and a good stick, a good wool blanket has a beautiful reliability and multifunctional simplicity to it. So in this video, I want to use the Great Kilt to explore maintaining core body temperature in general, and how to simplify clothing from a survival perspective. So this video is mainly going to focus on those topics, but I know I'll get lots of questions on the history and culture of the plaid. So first of all, a quick historical summary. But if you want to learn more, please check out all my past videos. I've got a ton of them, and I'll link some learning resources in the description below. So, you ready? So it's referred to by many names, which gets a bit confusing. It's called the Great Kilt, the belted plaid, the plaid, the plaid, the brechine and ailey, the faily more, the brechine and faily, and there's probably some other names. And it's called a kilt because that's what I did to the last person who called it a skirt. Now the word kilt probably comes from an old English word, kilting, which means to gather, which probably refers to the way you gather the pleats at the back of it when you wear it. But for this video, I'll mainly refer to it as the plaid or the plaid, as that's the shortest and easiest one for me to say. And these words come from the Gaelic plager, which means blanket. And that's all this really is. One big untailored blanket, 4 to 5 meters long and 1.5 centimeters wide, made from 100% medium to heavyweight wool fabric. So these were traditionally made with hand-spun wool yarn, woven in hand looms that were only about 75 centimeters wide, so that you could pass the horizontal threads with your hands. So what people in the Highlands generally used to do was make one long bit of cloth, about 9 yards long, cut it in half, and then sew it lengthways so you would have a shorter, wider blanket. So the plaid probably evolved from people generally using a blanket or a cloak as a rain cover, and over the passage of time they seem to get larger and larger to the point that between the 15th and 18th century men wore it as their main outer garment in the style that you see me wearing it in my videos. Now the women of the Highlands wore something similar known as the erisade, which is the same idea, a big multifunctional wool blanket, but it was worn in different ways as an outer garment over a dress. Now I'll do a more detailed video on the erisade in a future video, but some of the uses I'll show today can be applied to the erisade. It was just typically a bit shorter than the great kilt. Now, later in history, after 1746 and the defeat of the Jacobites, there was a deliberate effort to crush Gallic culture, and the wearing of the plaid was actually completely banned for a time. Now later on in history, around the Victorian era, the plaid became more militarized as it became known.
See, that's what I know it more as, like a uniform.
Right. Imagine somebody coming in and telling you that your type of clothing is banned because they don't like your culture.
Yeah.
Like, that's wild, man. Can you imagine that happening today?
Yes.
You really could?
Yeah.
You can imagine that happening today. That's crazy.
And I feel like in some cultures that does happen.
I mean, in our culture.
In ours?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure, like, yeah, obviously
maybe.
culture somewhere around the world, sure, but like in our culture today, I can't imagine that happening.
Known as the ceremonial dress for Scottish regiments, and its simplicity and practicality started to get lost. Around this era, we also see the rise of clan tartans, which didn't really exist prior to this. There would have been differences in patterns in different districts and areas of Scotland, but not really specific to clans like we see nowadays. There's a few theories on where the word tartan comes from, one of which is from an old Spanish word, tartana, which means a fine piece of cloth. For most of the plaid's existence, it would have had a simple checker pattern, but one of its names, brechain in Ailey, the brech refers to it being speckled. Now the coloration of the wool either came from the natural colour of the sheep or was dyed using locally available plants, such as sorrel roots for red, gorse flowers for yellow, heather for purple, bracken for green, and old man's beard lichen for gingery orange. So this means that the colours of the plaids were often quite camouflaged.
That's what I was about to
they were
say.
literally made from the colours in the landscape.
Yeah, look at him.
Well, that's
So with all that in mind,
Yeah, that's awesome. That's such a good survival mechanism. So we have
whether
this,
that's intentional or not.
we
that's
have
really cool.
an item of clothing that keeps you really warm because of the wool, can turn into a rather comfortable blanket, and something that can camouflage you during hunting or whatnot, but also probably quite waterproof. I don't know. I think he's going to say that
Yeah,
later.
it'll probably repel.
Water quite
fairly
well. Yeah.
For this video, I want to try source some plaids that are as close as I could get to the real historical thing. Now, the dream is to one day go through the whole hand making and natural dyeing process to really understand it, but that's out of my means for the time being. So the next best thing for me was to try source some medium to heavyweight 100% wool fabric made in
I wonder
the
how
UK
heavy those blankets
with
are.
some sort of natural colours to them. And to be honest, even that wasn't very easy, as so much manufacturing is done overseas nowadays. But here are some examples of what I found. I've managed to get some sort of medium weight fabric here, and then one very heavyweight wool fabric. And over the past few months, I've been testing them out in the field and spending the night in them. So before I cover survival uses, let's cover some of the basics of core body temperature regulation so we can better understand how we can use the plaid to battle the elements. So in basic physics, there are three ways heat is lost: through radiation, conduction, and convection. And in the outdoors, this best translates as when we expose our skin on a still cold day, we experience heat loss through radiation. Chilly. When we sit or lay down on the cold bare ground, we experience conduction as the earth sucks out our body heat. And when we get wet by the rain or sweat and moisture evaporates or is blown by the wind, we experience convection. So simply put, how to battle these in cold climates is to layer up, keep off the wind and wet, and stay off the ground. This applies to how you use your clothing and when creating shelter. And as I'll show you, we can...
Isn't it crazy how much knowledge we've lost through the generations?
I know, man.
Of just common sense things that we don't really have to think about or worry about now because of modern convenience, but is life-saving information.
It's more than life-saving. we've lost simplicity.
I know.
And we've lost the life-saving
I crave
knowledge.
that.
Me too. I think a
going
lot of
back
people
to
do,
the
and
land
a
and
lot of people don't even realize they crave
I
it.
know.
But, you know, the weird thing is, it's only happened over a few generations.
I know, fairly
like,
modern.
It's like if you go back just like, you know, 3 grandparents before, they still retained a lot of this knowledge. It was over the last 2 to 3 generations that was lost. Our parents' generations, our grandparents' generations, and maybe their parents' generations.
But even then, there was a huge difference between our great-grandparents and our grandparents to us now.
It's just when the industrial age happened,
Yeah.
that was when everybody went to the factories and let go of
having to worry
survival.
about that stuff,
Yeah. No one was growing their own food anymore, not at scale anyway.
Right.
People weren't hunting anymore, you know, and just weren't having to survive. And
I want to
so,
learn those skills again.
yeah, they're very, very good to know that type of thing.
You can use the plaid to affect all 3 of these. Now let's look at the first 2, and here we must learn from the masters. What I mean by that is learning from the wildlife in your environment, a concept known as biomimicry.
Yeah.
Take the red deer for example. Here is a piece of red deer winter hide, and from it we can decipher 3 defined layers. Closest to the skin is a layer of fine, soft, downy hair known as ground hair. This provides an insulative base layer for the animal, which also helps wick moisture away, keeping it warm. Then there is multiple layers of hair, which in the case of the red deer are hollow, thus trapping air, keeping it insulated.
Really?
The third outermost
Didn't know
layer
that.
is known as the guard hairs and are for keeping off the wind and
That's
wet.
amazing.
They form a dense mat when flattened by the wind and rain, and these hairs also produce a small amount of oil that helps the water bead off, stopping
Wow.
moisture reaching the skin, while also allowing breathability.
That's so cool.
Now we can mimic the deer by how we use our clothing, both modern and historical, with a wick base layer, multiple layers of insulation, and finally a protective wet, windy or shell layer. And you could argue that this outer shell layer is the most important for keeping you warm in bad weather, and it's here the plaid is primarily used. And just like the guard hairs of the red deer, we can mimic its function in both the plaid and modern jackets by having a densely woven fabric treated with a hydrophobic substance. And in the case of the plaid, traditionally they would have still retained the natural oil from the sheep, known as lanolin, and I have a whole video discussing this.
Yeah.
And modern jackets are treated with synthetic proofing. Now let's compare these 2 shell layers to learn a bit more. Now in terms of comfort, well-fitting and lightweightness, modern jackets win hands down, and the technology for these keeps on getting better. But what can't they do? Well, they can only do one thing, and often the more complex
Keep you warm,
something
that's
is,
it.
the more
Or-
things there is for it to go wrong. They don't have much insulation by themselves, and even a small spark from a campfire can easily burn holes in them. Now in comparison, the plaid is bulky, heavy and cumbersome, but as I'll show you, it can be used in a ton of different ways, and its simplicity means reliability. It provides more insulation alone, and although generally less waterproof, as it's made from wool, it retains 80% of its insulative value even when it's soaking wet.
Wow.
Wool also swells when wet, providing a
80%?
wind barrier. Wool is also fire retardant against your average sparks and embers, so you can rest easy
I didn't know that.
next to your campfire.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
So 80%, I mean, it can be soaking wet and retain 80% of its ability to protect you
impressive, yeah.
from the cold.
This is why natural fibers are superior to
Oh,
synthetic.
so many reasons why. And what was it? Oh yeah, fire retardant. That's amazing. I didn't know wool was fire retardant.
Not to that extent.
Yeah, not to that extent.
Finally, this brings us to how we can use the plaid as an outer garment and improvise shelter. Now, its biggest advantage is also one of its biggest disadvantages. A massive untailored cloth means it's multifunctional, but it also means it's an absolute pain in the arse to put on and takes quite a lot of practice to do it quickly. But here are 3 ways that you can gather the pleats and get it around your waist to get you started. The first way of putting it on is the most common one you see in demonstrations of the plaid, so I'll call it the classic method. Here you lay out your plaid flat on the ground and fold your pleats till you have a 4 legs distance of cloth either side of the gathered fabric. You then pass a belt or sash under the folds, lay on it so the pleats are just above your knees, then wrap the ends of the cloth evenly around you and secure around your waist with the belt.
And then the other part,
This method is
the
great
bag
for
just
when you're
drives
first
down.
learning and to demonstrate the gathering of the pleats, but it's not very practical on uneven or dirty ground, so it's difficult to do in the field. The next method is the standing method, where you stand holding the long edge of the cloth and fold the pleats with one hand.
I
And
think
hold
the
them
laying
together
method seems
with the other.
better.
Well, but
If it's
sometimes you gotta...
right, I know,
Then,
but
by draping the plaid over your back,
all things
with
considered, I think
practice, you can wrap it around you and put on the belt.
Oh.
This method is much more practical in the field and can be faster, but it takes practice to do, and the pleats never look as neat as the classic method. The final method is you can customize your plaid by adding belt loops or a drawstring along the line of your waist. So you can simply pass your belt through the loops and gather the pleats and hold it all in place. This is the most practical method for keeping it all together to transport when you're not wearing it, and it's easier to do with limited space compared to the classic method. But now it's tailored to only fit one size of person, and it's still not as practical as the standing method in some situations.
Can you imagine traveling with one of those? How much space it would take up in your suitcase?
yeah, but here's the thing. Oh, you mean traveling like
Yeah, like,
modern day traveling,
yeah.
not like backpacking or something. But like potentially, you could go out with this thing.
Although I guess traveling, you'd wear it.
I probably wouldn't if I knew it was going to be really stormy and like snowy and stuff. I probably wouldn't go out this to be my tent. But if I didn't expect that type of weather and it's like a little bit cool, this could be your tent. You could wear your shelter with you in a way.
Yeah,
That's wild.
Whatever way you gather the pleats or belt it, you should now look like this, and we can now look at the different configurations of wearing it. The first one I call the pockets and tail. Here you take a corner of the plaid in front of you, gather a small fold, and tuck it in the belt behind you. Repeat for the other side. This gives you two large pockets in front, perfect for storing hats and gloves or dry tinder, and leaves a tail of fabric hanging down behind. It keeps cloth off the top half of your body, so it's good for hot weather or for sword fencing, but it does tend to drag along the ground behind you. Next method I call the cloak method, where you simply grab the tail from behind you and fling it over your head and shoulders to create a cloak.
Yeah, that's the way to keep warm.
This is great for keeping off the wind and rain and getting cozy by the campfire. The many pleats at the back of the kilt also helps insulate you from the ground when sitting.
Yeah.
The cloak can either be held in place with your hands or pinned in place to form a hood. The hood also helps break up the outline of your human form, aiding in camouflage. So, let's put this to the test.
Oh man, I just
Can
saw
you see
that.
me here?
I thought it was him right here, but he probably isn't.
What about here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see you there.
Definitely there.
Or here?
Yep.
Yeah, but not if I wasn't looking for you.
Right, only because I know.
Let me know in the comments. The next method I call the shoulder method, where you grab the cloak an arm's distance on either side and bring it over your left shoulder and under your right armpit. You can then secure in place with a pin or
I like
leather tie.
those.
The pin
Yeah, me
is
too.
more decorative, but will damage the fabric over time. The leather tie is less pretty, but more practical and doesn't damage the fabric. This is my favourite method of wearing it, as it creates a large pocket on your back, useful for carrying light goods or extra clothing. It forms many layers of fabric that trap air on one shoulder, but at the same time still leaves half of your upper body exposed to prevent overheating.
I love this.
If you still get too hot, you can simply shift it off your shoulder to sit on your waist, keeping it out of the way. This is useful for energetic tasks, such as collecting and preparing fire.
It also turns into a
The final
backpack of
method of
sorts.
wearing it I call the anorak method. Starting with the plaid in the cloak configuration, untuck your front pockets from behind and tie these corners in an overhand knot. Then, with your hood still on, slip the knot over your head. This creates a secure hood and completely covers your upper body with a layer of wool fabric, with very large cozy sleeves. But in doing so, you'll lose all three of your useful pockets. So what about ways of sleeping in the plaid? Well, I've found you can use it on its own in the summertime, but for the rest of the year, it's best to think of it as an outer bivvy, layering extra wool blankets and animal skins to keep you warm in the colder months, and also utilising sleeping next to a fire. So with that in mind, let's look at some sleeping methods. The first I'll call the bivvy method. First, make a mattress from animal skins or vegetation to reduce conduction. Then, lay out one body length of cloth on top of the mattress. You can create a pillow by rolling up the corners or folding in extra clothing. You can then pull the rest of the plaid over you, tucking it under your legs and side. This creates a double layer of fabric on top of your body with enough extra to cover your head.
That is
I
amazing.
really like the
from the biting midges.
simplicity.
Yes.
The next
always
one I'll
like
call the
simple.
bivvy
Me
tarp
too.
method. You start the same as the bivvy method, but use the excess cloth to suspend above you on a ridge line and peg out the corners to create a simple shelter to keep the worst of the weather off you.
And then you
This
use
is
it
best used with
as a
extra wool
blanket too.
blankets, but there's still enough plaid on the bottom half to wrap a little around you. You can create attachments without damaging the cloth by using pine cones or smooth pebbles in the fabric with a clove hitch knot
Oh my
slipped over it.
gosh.
The final
So
sleeping
clever.
method I'll call the stuffed wrap method, which is useful if all you have to make the mattress from is loose leaves or vegetation. For this, lay out your plaid and on the top quarter of it create your mattress. Then fold the plaid lengthways over it and tuck in the sides to stop the vegetation falling out. You can then lay on top of the leaves and fold the plaid widthways over you to create a double layer of fabric over your body, helping to trap more heat.
Wow.
So there's a bunch of ways of using the plaid, and maybe you'll figure out some other methods yourself. Now, obviously, like everything, the plaid has its downsides. It's heavy, it's bulky, it's difficult to put on. It can be cumbersome and it catches the wind, and it's generally not as
heavy, though?
comfortable
Is
to
my
wear
question.
as a lot of modern clothing. However, as I said at the beginning of the video, to me it's the jack of all trades when it comes to clothing and simple shelter. So sure, it's not as comfortable to wear as a modern jacket. It's not as warm and lightweight as a down sleeping bag. It's not as waterproof and easy to set up as a tarp. It's not as effective as a specialized backpack. But what it is,
But it's everything.
one simple,
Right.
rugged cloth that
Exactly.
can do all of those things.
Where's he at?
There, yeah, that's what
Ah. All right. This was great. This was a really interesting video.
Yeah.
I did not get to see, when I briefly learned about the kilt a while back, I didn't get to see really it in action like I did
Right.
here. And this is amazing. And I agree with what he's saying here. The modern fabrics that are, they probably can keep you warmer, keep water off you.
And they're
lighter weight,
convenient.
convenient in some ways, but none of them have what this one piece of cloth has. A
The
piece of clothing,
versatility, yeah.
a sleeping bag,
Yeah.
a mattress you could make out of it on the ground. It's fireproof. It's windproof in a way. It's a backpack. It's so versatile. I get it. I would like to have one of these. I think it would be phenomenal. To me, this, although yeah, it's not as lightweight and stuff as some other modern fabrics. If you're going on a shorter hike or something, this would actually probably take some weight off you, because you could actually use
right,
it.
it saves space in your pack, so to speak. For
You don't
all
need a
the-
pack.
Right.
If you're
it's-
just going, like, you could fold it like he did to where you could store stuff in the back or on the front and then turn it into your sleeping bag or your
Yeah.
tent. Like, how cool is that? Wow.
That's really cool.
Wow. And it does do a pretty good job of camouflage. Like, I was guessing where he
Yeah,
was.
like if I didn't know someone was there,
You would have
and I was
looked at this
looking
picture, you'd have been
yeah,
like,
I would know.
you wouldn't have been thinking someone's sitting there
Yeah.
hiding from you. And I think that's the purpose. And I think, so I get it now, why they look different colors traditionally is probably
For different scenarios.
the environment
Yeah.
that whoever is wearing that particular plaid, the environment he'd be in,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of have some camouflage. I'm guessing that's what I gather from that. But that's wild, man. I had no idea. I knew it was more useful than I originally thought before I looked at this at all, but I had no idea it was this useful.
Yeah.
But what do you think?
Awesome.
Yeah. You got anything you want to add before we go?
No.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please click that like button. Feel free to drop your comments or suggestions about this video or others. And let us know, guys. Do we need to know anything else about the Great Kilt? Is there anything in this video that he left out that would be interesting for us to know? Please feel free to leave that in the comments. But thank you so much, guys. Until next time. Peace.
Bye.